welcome.
Hello.
All right. I am
Hey guys.
so excited to welcome Andrew to not the show, but to the lightning lesson today. EC, longtime listener. Good to see you, and all
Likewise.
the other folks joining us today. Thank you for the people that got to share some of your promotion requests with us and some questions. We'll see if we can have some time for Q&A at the end today. But I'm going to start with introducing Andrew, and then we'll get into some questions. So this one will be slightly different from the other conversations we've had together, where I'll get to ask Andrew all the questions about promotions that I've had. So I'm pretty excited about that.
You're
Cool.
no slouch. You're no slouch yourself. I'm going to ask you some questions as well. We'll get a full
Oh
360.
no. Oh no. You got it. You got it.
Cool.
All right. Well, I've got way too many tabs open on my computer and in my brain, but let's get okay, I'm a little disorganized. But anyways, let's start with Andrew and letting him introduce himself because he's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to hang. I feel like I'm also like first time, long time in terms of fan and being a part of the Maven community. But I'm Andrew. I'm wearing basically the same outfit I think I was wearing when I took this screenshot. I'm a former two-time head of growth. So I worked at HubSpot in the early days. I worked at a video marketing company called Wistia. I worked at another company called Postscript, and I work in growth. And about 4 years ago, I stopped working in growth and I started coaching people who are leading growth teams at other companies. That's what I do today. So you can connect with me either on LinkedIn. I've got some free stuff about how to build a high impact growth team. I've got some more paid stuff if you're interested in getting a little bit deeper and working with me. But I'm just excited to hang today and to share some of the things that I've seen in my own journey and things that I've seen coaching other folks who have kind of worked their way up their career ladder and obviously learn a little bit from Elena as well.
Awesome. Welcome, welcome, Andrew. And then for those that have been following my journey, I'm Elena. I've been working in product the majority of my career at companies like BlackRock, OpenTable, Liquid Space, Nextdoor. And now I've pivoted to spending my time with product folks and teaching. So I teach a course called Develop CPO Level Skills. So some of you are thinking about promotions. There are several folks that are thinking about that director to VP role. And so my course really focuses on how do you move from building great products to building great companies. And the other one, AI powered executive communication, focuses on how do you present yourself and your company externally. So there's a lot of questions around, hey, I do a lot of work, but I can't get my manager to really listen to it or understand all the things that I'm doing and how do I provide value to the company. Um, like Andrew, I also have a bunch of free stuff, free lessons. You can find that on maven.com, Elena Luneva, and also on my Substack. And feel free to reach out to me on my email. All right, so a little bit more about some of the things that Andrew and I do. Andrew, you want to introduce the growth operating system?
Sure. One of the things that I've basically learned that I work on with almost every single client who I get to work with one on one is something that I have dubbed like their operating system. What I find is that most folks, especially when you're more junior and you're trying to get promoted, are typically focused on the what. So, what being the strategy, what to do, what tactics to run, what playbooks to set up, what good looks like, what resources you need, all that kind of stuff. And of course, you need that. But typically, the more senior you get, and we'll get into this today, the more you need to lean on systems as you remove yourself from being the main doer and you're setting up a system for other doers to thrive. And so, to do that, to scale your impact, typically you need to make artifacts. You got to write stuff down, you got to repeat it, you've got to clarify all the things that you do intuitively when you're a very, very high powered IC. So, I made a program to help you do that. If you've ever done it the first time, it's called the Growth Operating System. It's specifically for folks who work on cross functional growth teams, whether that's product growth or growth marketing or kind of overseeing both. And that's what it is.
Awesome, awesome. Definitely check that out. Andrew is a powerhouse. And then for me, I have two courses coming up in January that we talk through. So one really focusing on moving from the systems that you build as a product leader to how do you then run the business. So go to market, financial acumen, executive presence. And then the second one really focuses on how do you then represent your company, whether you're on stage in a podcast with Andrew or representing it with investors or customers. And both Andrew and I do coaching. So feel free to reach out if that's of interest.
And I gotta plug
So,
you, Elena, because you have
oh my
you have the
goodness.
number one most played podcast that I've ever recorded with someone. So if y'all want to hear more about like Elena's non-highlight reel, like kind of the Instagram versus reality of some of this stuff, that's sort of what we talk about is her journey into tech and like all the bumps and bruises along the way. It's literally the number one most played in all the 85 episodes I've done.
Yeah, if you want to hear embarrassing and raw, and Andrew is the podcast to listen to all of us. But thank you for that. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get into the Q&A and get to know how Andrew thinks about promotions and all the different bumps in the road and how to think about it. And for everybody else, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll pick through those in our last 15 minutes. So first, just stepping back, you see a lot of patterns across the portfolio companies that you work with, the growth product leaders. What are some of the trends you're seeing? Is AI getting rid of growth and product management, or do we have hope?
I mean, I see a lot of hype around AI, but I haven't seen anyone who's adjusted their operating system to put any of us out of a job yet. So I've seen like a lot of push for more efficiency, but I just haven't seen anybody's jobs going away. I've just seen more work units being available to do. So if anything, it feels like people are busier than ever. I'm picking up on a vibe that folks are like maybe the most burned out that they've ever been because there's just so many new things coming out, and it's like the rate of new things is operating at a pace that like no mortal can keep up with. So there's always the next tool, there's always the next hack. If you spend any time on X or YouTube, it feels like you're 1,000 years behind already. So I'm definitely seeing that on like an individual level. And then on a company level, I have supported a few companies that have lost product market fit this year. And
Mm,
that's like weird to see on the inside. I've like read articles that some other smart people have talked about this, but I hadn't seen it on the inside. And so I've seen that. And so one of the things I'm encouraging everybody to do, no matter where you're at, is I think maybe to just realize that there's no safe anymore. And like we just can't predict what the future is going to bring. So if there ever was a time to invest in the personal brand, to like make sure the resume is ready so you don't have to get it ready, like now's a great time for that.
I love that, and that definitely resonates. Can you tell people more the examples of a company losing product market fit, or what does that even mean these
Yeah.
days?
I don't want to share like the details that would
Yeah, of course
identify
not.
the
Yeah.
company or the situation, but there's two examples. One in the ed tech space where there's a company that I'm working with that now education is just so easy and so accessible with GPT and all of the, all the free coaching that you can get in the snap of a finger there, that it's just changed their portfolio of products. And so it's just dramatically
Mm,
changed the demand that they're seeing. So I'm seeing that. And then there was another company who I'm supporting that had maybe a more drastic change where some features that were kind of their prime paid upgradable features now are available for free and are available probably more powerfully using AI and other tools. And so they called a code red. Their sign up started to dip, but like it wasn't like an overnight thing, but more that they just see that the future of their business is extremely shaky and they're rethinking what their value prop is and how they deliver on that. And that's sort of what it looks like. I don't think it feels very good in either situation.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We've had to go through that next door during COVID. So different, not an AI shift, but we had product market fit. And then I was a general manager for local businesses, and then local businesses shut down. So it was a very different way of operating. Can relate.
Yeah,
You don't only need the AI revolution for that to be a reality.
that's true.
Um, yeah. So switching gears a little bit, when you and moving more into promotion. When you think about those different levels, some of the questions people had in the survey that we shared at the beginning of this week is, that clarity about what does good look like at the different levels. So when you think about a director versus a VP, and you think about that jump, what actually changes about the job?
I'm going to answer this, but I want to frame it with something that you shared with me when we recorded our podcast together, probably a year ago. I've thought about it almost every day since. I don't know if I've shared this with you. You said in your own career you had to go through, maybe got some feedback that you went through this transition from being right to being effective. And I thought that was a really elegant way of
Mm-hmm.
saying it. The way I've sometimes thought about it for other folks that are listening to this is as you get more senior, you kind of go through this identity shift where you go from being the person running the plays, maybe a player coach as a director, you still have some individual contributor work, but for a lot of us, we're the best. We're the best doer of whatever our capability is, still as a director. And to get to the
Yeah.
VP level, if you're still the best doer on your team, it means you're probably not doing a good job at the VP level, which is developing talent and setting up systems to be successful. So there's a little bit of an identity shift from being the player coach to being coach first. And so I think that there are maybe three tangible things that I can share as part of that identity shift that folks can think about and work on. I think the number one is going to be focus. Like you need better focus to move up the food chain in terms of your career, and specifically like less stuff in terms of what you're
Yeah.
doing and thinking in a longer time horizon. And so the people who I get to support that are more senior, their number one skill is that they're trying to figure out which amazing idea, because they're drowning in amazing ideas, is the one that they should work on and focus on, and how to say no or not right now to those other great ideas that just aren't as amazing as the number one. So focus is number one and a longer term time horizon with that focus. Number two would be communication. And to be more specific, the skill of translating your ideas for non-native speakers and for different
Mm,
audiences. And this is something that you see. Like when you see a lot of folks that are VP or even, kind of part of the C-suite, they basically have the same presentation that they spend a lot of time figuring out what to do. Then they spend equal, if not more amount of time figuring out how do I explain this to all the different groups of people. It's not the same presentation. It's like, we're going to share this version of it to the board. I'm going to share this version of it to the other VPs. I'm going to share this version of it to my direct capability. I'm going to share this version at the company all staff meeting. I'm going to share this version if we need to share something to customers. So that in itself is a skill and a muscle to grow. And then the third, so we got focus, communication. The third would be creating the systems for other people to thrive so that you can scale your influence and your impact without scaling your units of work. And specifically for me, I like to encourage folks to create, I call it like an operations manual. So strategy
yeah.
would be what we're working on and why. Operations manual, how do we go about doing the work? How do we make decisions? How do we make trade-offs? What are the values on our team? And that's how you can kind of scale your decision-making process in a way that others can take and run with without you in the room.
I love that. I love that. I do see that the three things you mentioned, so specifically building those systems where you can scale yourself. And I do feel AI is a really good co-pilot there that you spend so much time in meetings, you spend so much time rehashing information for the CFO, for the CEO, for your team, that it could be a really great co-pilot for you to do that while freeing up the time to think about the idea, figure out whom to influence so that you can really spend the time in a way that's more valuable. So a lot of people in the survey that we did mentioned like, hey, I'm drowning in work. I don't have time for the strategic things. Any other suggestions you have for getting that leverage or getting that time?
Yeah, so if you're feeling like you're just spread too thin and there's too many things going on, at its core, you kind of have a few options. One, you could do less stuff and to figure out like what stuff to say no to, you would need to prioritize and then find an elegant way to say not right now, which is a skill set in
Yeah.
itself. Or the other thing that you could do, I think a lot of folks get stuck. I don't want to say get stuck. I think a lot of folks um, do things the way that they've always done them because no one has ever encouraged them or they've been never been given the green light or the agency to question. And I think when folks lift their head up and they think holistically about what they're working on, sometimes they come to the conclusion that there's higher impact stuff that they could be doing. And so
Mm,
if that's you, and that comes back to being able to prioritize and understand, but I think that's the main skill. And so if you're working on stuff and you feel like you're just doing too much and it's not even the right stuff, what would the right stuff be? And I'd encourage you to model it out. If you were to work on this right stuff, what would that do for the business? And is that better for the business than what you're currently doing? If so, that's your pitch. And that's how you explain it to other folks. And maybe you'll be able to say no to the existing stuff that you're doing, take on this higher impact work, or maybe you'll be able to delegate it to some person or something, whether it's AI or a person, so they can take that less and more impactful work. But I think identifying it as the first step and then pitching it might be the second.
yeah, yeah. And to get back to what you said previously, the pitching, the importance of saying it in the words that people understand.
Yeah.
A lot of I spend a lot of time in my coaching thinking through, hey, you're talking in product speak, you're talking in engagement numbers or the features and how they look like versus this is the financial impact if you're talking to the CFO, or here's the business outcome if you're talking to the salesperson. So really putting that pitch into context goes a long way. I
I
totally
think a,
agree.
I think a good frame for that is sometimes I'll ask folks, like they'll start telling me like the acronyms and I'll be like, listen, put all that to the side for a second. Let's pretend that this is your family business and you're talking to your aunt or your uncle. They don't know all the acronyms. They don't know all the jargon. Just talk to them in terms of what it means for the business and the family inheritance and like all that. And usually when you get out of the weeds and you think about things in that way, usually that's a good frame to explain things to more senior audiences.
Exactly, exactly. So you've worked with a lot of growth and product leaders. What are some of those, maybe the top reasons why people maybe some level of stall out at the director level?
So I kind of mentioned it before. I think that there's a shift in your value that happens where
Hmm.
for top individual contributors and sometimes directors as well, we put a lot of our personal value in our productivity. And at some point that will hold you back from continuing on.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah.
folks either don't realize or don't know how to make that shift. And to me, the shift looks like making the system for others, and it means kind of shifting from like working hard to working on the right stuff. And so there's maybe a few, and I think folks understand that in principle. Like we could talk about that and everyone would nod their head like, yeah, yeah, of course. So I think a few of the things that stop people from doing that, um, first would be lack of alignment around what great looks like.
Hmm. Hmm.
Sometimes for folks in my world, this looks like lack of clarity around what they have ownership and accountability for, in terms of like ownership being what's your service area and accountability, like what are the numbers and KPIs or areas of the business that you need to report on and you need to grow. And if you don't have clarity on that, there's almost no way that you can be successful. And as a part two, if you and your execs are not on the same page there, it's very, very hard to be successful. So the alignment is really
Hmm.
important, especially if you work in this gray area where like maybe things are growing and the company's changing a lot and the go-to-market motion isn't right. All those things impact that. So lack of alignment would be number one. Number two would be doing way too much stuff instead of being really focused on what the more impactful work is. And so I can literally see this when I coach directors. One of the first questions I'll ask if I'm coaching someone is, what are you working on right now? Can you take me through your top priorities? And directors will give me four, five, six, sometimes like seven things. It's way too many things. When you ask VPs, and I've coached one C-level product leader, it's like two things, maybe three tops, but like usually the third one, you're like, I know, it's too many, right? So the more senior, the more focused you are, and being able to say not right now to amazing things. And then the third would be, again, scaling your impact through others, which in practice looks like working on your leadership, communication, and management skills. I think
Hmm.
most directors have really good intuition around what great looks like. They have great standards for themselves, and they have to learn how to hold others to those same standards without micromanaging and without giving away too much power, and sort of finding the right leadership voice and style and communication style takes some practice. So those are three of the things that I see.
I love that. The first one you mentioned is that alignment with your manager.
Yeah.
That can feel A little scary because you're like, well, I should know what I'm responsible for. How do you have that conversation with someone who's your boss?
I have these words seared into my brain from when I hired a professional coach for the first time. What you find is that for many folks, if things aren't going well in your job, either you've gotten some tough feedback or just things aren't feeling right, a lot of times this is the core challenge is that you're just not on
Hmm.
the same page. So the words I have seared into my brain are clarify and verify. So if you're new to a job, this is the easiest time to do it. Hey, I just wanted to, before we get going, as part of my 90-day plan, I wanted to sit down and have a conversation around ownership and accountability. In terms of accountability, here's the two KPIs that I see myself. If we could fast forward in a year, these are the numbers that I'm hoping to show you have gone up. Are those the right numbers? That's the verify part. And then in terms of ownership, here's the areas of the growth model, of the product, of the marketing acquisition side, whatever that is, that I see myself really getting to work with my surface area to move the needle on those numbers. So if you're new,
Hmm.
it looks like that. And I think if you're in an existing role, any planning cadence is a great time to regroup on that. And the way that I always think about it isn't like, hey, I just wanted to regroup what my job is today, and more so forward looking. Hey, so boss, whoever that is, if we could fast forward 6 months down the road, if we fucking crush it, what are the two numbers that we're reporting on and we're showing to the board and we're high fiving over? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I think they're these two. And before I get going and I prioritize and I set up my roadmap and all that stuff, I want to make sure you agree. And then the same thing on the surface area. So I would do it more forward looking if you're an existing role, either annual planning or quarterly planning, whenever the right time is.
Yeah, yeah. You have this great 30, 60, 90 for a head of growth. I really like the concept of having that going forward. I feel like when you start in an organization, you have this, all right, for the next quarter, this is what you're doing, this is what good looks like. But that falls off as you continue in the company. So bringing that back up really resonates with me. So that's
Totally.
a good way of looking at it. Awesome. And I'll drop that in the notes in a second. Um, so as you think about just becoming a director and the definition of success has to change, your your good continues to evolve, looking farther and farther out. So thinking about those core skills to be promotion ready. If you look across the people who do get promoted, what are those 3 to 4 skills that they all have in common?
All right. Number one, prioritization and focus. We've talked about it in a few
Yep.
different ways. It's like the most important one. And I think in practice, what this looks like is when new ideas come to you, which are going to be every single day if you're at a growing company, you just spend a lot of time evaluating the impact, usually by modeling out different scenarios and then comparing to what you're currently doing or what's currently in plan, and then adjusting your roadmap. So I think that that is number one. Number two would be driving alignment through visibility. We talked about this a little bit, translating the ideas for different audiences, specifically for non-native speakers. I think a lot about folks that don't spend all day in your capability, that don't understand all the acronyms and best practices. And I think in practice, this looks like understanding, to use product speak, the jobs to be done for the audience, and then translating your work in a way that is interesting and kind of like what they need to know. So prioritization, focus, driving alignment. Third would be making the system for others that pulls you, I guess, out of the work. So having some type of SOP or operations or process manual that approaches how you'll approach the work, and then delegation and coaching. Right. So I think the biggest mistakes there are like either you dump and run and people are lost and they don't make progress and you're frustrated about that, or you micromanage because you just don't really know how to properly delegate. So there's different frameworks and things like that. Those are the things I think are really important. And maybe as a bonus, working in tech is hard. Like if you work at a
Yeah.
startup, best case scenario is it grows really fast and like it'll probably outgrow you. And so the imposter syndrome, like the burnout, the lack of confidence, like that's a part of this journey for everybody. And so I think finding ways to help your inner game, I think is as important as the other stuff we've talked about. You can get it through coaching, you can get it through meditation, you can get it through having a mentor. It's a million ways, but we all need it. And like, I've talked to 85 people on my podcast about that exact thing. Every one of them have gone through times when they got knocked off the horse, and finding ways you can get back on is probably the best skill you can work on ever.
Yeah. you talked at the beginning about sort of thinking about yourself, thinking about your brand, and I feel like that's a really good way to not lose yourself in the shuffle and all the changes that happen in tech change around us because sometimes things are done to you and
Yeah.
you can't necessarily prevent it. And how can you then continue? How can you then continue to still be you and still grow and still be the person that you need to be going forward? So we're almost at Q&A. So as people think about the questions you want to ask Andrew, go ahead and put them into the chat and we'll go through that. But I wanted to ask maybe a final question about managing up. I think for me personally, it's been hard because I'm like, well, if I just do the work, it'll speak for itself. But a lot of this, VP director game, or really at any point, is making sure that the people around you or the people that make decisions, the people that make decisions about promotions, know who you are.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you do that? How do you do that well?
It's hard because there's different types of there's managing up and then there's visibility, and I kind of think you need
Yeah,
both. I'll answer them both quickly, and then if folks want to ask questions, we can do a Q&A and dig into each. But I think on the managing up, most folks, I think by default, think managing up is just keeping their boss in the loop and like updating them
mm,
often about what they're doing and like what's coming next. And it's really not. I think the folks who are exceptional at this usually bring their boss into their decision making. And so I think in practice, it's here's what I'm prioritizing, and then having a discussion around and how would you change these priorities? Or you bring a
yeah,
specific challenge in a prod. If you don't have issues with the prioritization, you bring your boss into a project. Hey, I'm working on this project. I feel really good about these areas, but I'm struggling with this one area. Can we brainstorm it together? Or do you have information that I might be missing at my level of the organization that'd be helpful for me to solve this problem? So it's bringing your boss into the way that you think and not updating them on the work that you're doing or about to do. I think that that helps a lot in terms of managing up. And then in terms of visibility, again, I've talked about a few artifacts today. The strategy artifact, what we're doing and why, and the operating system, which is how we're going about the work. What I like to encourage folks to do is minimum once a month, you should do some sharing publicly in the company. If there's a lunch and learn, a monthly
yeah,
review, whatever it is. And when you share, I'm going to give you two examples. An example of what visibility without like the politics version of visibility looks like is, hey, we just shipped this thing. It looks great. Like, shout out to Jack and Katie. Like, they crushed it on this. Like, it's cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of those. Like, oh my gosh. And everybody's seen that. But I think the better version, like the high impact visibility that has more influence, looks like tying things back to those two artifacts. So, hey, in a second, I'm going to show you something I'm really excited about that we just shipped. As a quick reminder, I work in growth. We're focused on this strategy right now. It's important because it ladders up to our company goal. And a core part of our operating system is that we do experimentation before we do deep polish. Here's an example of something that we just shipped. It's not fully polished, but it looks great. Shout out to Jack and Katie. They crushed it on the design, whatever. Same thing, 30 seconds of
hmm
framing at the beginning, way more impact. And those are two quick ideas to increase managing up and visibility.
yeah. They're both so important, but one is really keeping the people that matter, the people that have influence, just effectively remembering who in the world you are and what do you even do here.
Yeah.
Because the way I think about it, all of us and executives especially are like goldfish. They have the 8 seconds, and then usually they come into the conversation with a bunch of other conversation and a bunch of other fires.
Yeah.
So it takes them, it feels like they need to zoom into like, oh, okay, this is Mary or this is Shilpa. This is what she does here. Oh, and she just gave me that preview so I can connect back to who she is in this company.
The context is
Totally
so important.
need to do
And you've
it.
been in those rooms, it's like the larger the company gets, the more there's a certain number of promotions and there's a certain people that are up for promotion. And sometimes there's debate, there's definitely discussion. And so whether you like it or not, visibility is an important tool in that process. Just is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me turn it over to Gayanesh. So his question was, in a B2B environment, how do you go about promotions if you're a PM? Growth feels rather slower in such companies and is generally unclear if there's a definite path to going about the same. In B2C, it's generally easier to measure financial impact versus B2B in, say, a 1 year frame.
It's kind of interesting. All my experience is on the B2B side, primarily. I
There you
mean, as a
go.
coach, I've supported folks on both sides. Um, I'm going to assume maybe we're talking about maybe a longer sales cycle, maybe even like an enterprise type model. I think my answer here would be the same. I think in terms of like what you can actually do, I think for anyone who wants to get a promotion, what I'd encourage you to do is to think through what does the next level look like? We talked about a few things today, thinking longer term, saying no to less stuff, setting up the system, things like that. But it's going to be different based on your environment
Yeah.
and the context of where you're coming from. But to really think through, for you to be successful at the next level, what are the skills that you really need to be great at? Figure out for where you're at today, what are the two that you might want to work on? And then how can you work on those two skills every single week? And you can tell your manager that you want to work on those skills. You can make it part of your one-on-one to talk about them. You could ask for feedback on those two skills after important meetings. You could get a mentor, you could take a course or a coach, but it would be that. I think you typically get promoted when you've been doing the job and people see it,
Yeah.
and not so much when there's an opportunity. At least that's been my personal experience. I've gotten promotions when there weren't one, because I've been able to show that I was ready for that next level. And so I think there's learning what is the next level and what does it look like, and then really working on the skills. It doesn't really happen by accident. And I think what we've talked about today is maybe this mental frame that I've been thinking about recently, which is to be an amazing individual contributor, it looks like climbing up a ladder. But to get promoted from director to VP and beyond, it's a different ladder. It's not straight up the
Yeah.
same ladder. It's like you got to learn new skills. And when you start to do that job, you're at the bottom of that totem pole and you're going to make a bunch of mistakes. And the things that got you here are not the things that you need to work on to get to the next level. We've talked about some of them today. And so like it's a process to go learn those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found when I became a VP that I was somehow expected to know how to do that
With no training,
without any,
right?
yeah, without any sort of training. So I really
Yeah.
had to search on my own to get a coach, to take a course. But inside the company, it was like, here, have fun and don't mess up. So it's a very different mentality where there's a lot less of that scaffolding or that ladder, as you mentioned, that you join a completely different world. And so a spicy one from Don Shelley here around, with AI, we're all expected to do the jobs of three people. So his question is, so what if you're a director who has endured a 15-month hiring freeze and is doing the work of three people? How do you reduce your priorities? Is this a time to get out of your own future, to get out for your own future? Oof.
Gotta dig, gotta do some soul searching on that last one.
Yeah,
Um,
Don, I mean, I think there is a level of expectation around doing more with less. And so I've been in that company where the CEO told me, hey, with AI, you can just do more. So you don't need a big team anymore. And definitely had that conversation. So I think Andrew mentioned this, but one thing to do is focus on your own brand so you can answer that last question more easily of what are your options and how can you have those additional options. And I think Andrew will talk through this more, but in terms of focus and prioritization, having those hard conversations of what needs to drop and explicitly saying what you're not doing can actually be relatively liberating and serve you to focus on the ones that will move the business and let some of the other things slide and let the company feel some of that pain.
there's only so many units of work that one person can do. And so I always look at the inspiration or I look at the engineering team for inspiration here because I come from the marketing side of growth, although I've done a lot of product growth work, it's for 7 years where as a marketer. And on the marketing team, it's like, oh, the deadline's coming up. What if we just add this to the scope? Every marketing team just says, okay. And they work harder and longer and they sacrifice nights and weekends. And what I saw in the engineering team, certainly there was that as well. I don't want to knock any engineers, but what I saw was more rigor in terms of I have X amount of points available. We just had a points grooming meeting. I've got X amount of units of work that we've assigned to these points. Happy to take on something new. What do we need to drop to slot that in? And I really, really like
Hmm.
that. And I'd encourage everyone to think about their own workflow like that. Of course, there are times you need to flex. There's times when you're going to be in a peak. There's times when things will be slow. You'll be in a valley. But I think broadly, if we think about there's a finite amount that any mere mortal could do, what are the most important things for me to fill my bucket with? How can I say not right now to these other amazing things? And how can I communicate those trade-offs to my manager in a way that they'll understand? That's everything that you can do. So I think if you do that and it doesn't feel good, then you can listen to that inner dialogue and think, hey, maybe this moment has changed. Maybe it's not the right fit for me anymore. Or maybe you are okay
Hmm.
with that and you can make some changes or make a case for more resources. It's hard.
Yeah. Don, I just dropped a link to a Substack that says your CEO just got back from a conference. Now what? To give you some tools about having those trade-off conversations. Maybe they'll help. But it's tough. I can definitely relate. All right. Whoever Samsung SMA566B is asking, what about in a culture where that is top down? Does bringing the boss in the decision work? Do you risk some of those open conversations backfiring on you?
Yeah. So top-down culture meaning you don't get to decide your fate. It is assigned to you. Hey, we're
I
going to do
think
this.
so.
We're doing this. This is next. Maybe even work for one of those great CEOs or founders who changes the top-down decision making on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and you start to get a little bit of whiplash. There's only so much that you can control at different layers of the organization. Now, if you're a senior person and
Yeah.
this is happening, like if this was happening to Elena, I'm sure she would initiate some conversations and explain the trade-offs and maybe try to apply a little bit of pressure at her level of the organization. But if you're more junior, you might not be in a position where you could do that, or culturally that might not be acceptable. I think what you can do is explain trade-offs in terms of business impact. And so the cost of change or the cost of one decision over another, you could explain in terms of the business impact. And what I'd like to encourage folks to think about is that every executive team, there's sort of like a culture of decision making. Some for sure it's top down, it's authoritarian. At others, it might be data driven. At others, it might be storytelling. It might be customer first. So if you can figure out the way that this person, whoever the person is at the top that's making these, if you can figure out the language that they care about, you might be able to use that to your advantage to customize the way that you make your case. And that's what you can do,
Mhm.
right? We can't control other people. We can control the things that we can do, and that would be within our control.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Double down on that to really understand your audience. Like, who are you speaking to? What are their priorities? And how can you present your priorities and the things that you want to do, yourself included, from their context? So, the way I like to think about myself is as a product. So, you are probably the best person out there, but how do you understand who your buyer is, that executive team, and how do you get them to take that chance on you? And it really gets down to what is their problem space and how do you position yourself, your promotion as accretive to the business. So it's a little bit roundabout, but you're no longer talking about yourself. You're talking about your value to the company. All right. I think Varuska mentioned, could you please talk more about what other ways one can increase visibility?
I mean, we could brainstorm a bunch of ways, but I think that
Yeah.
80/20 looks like letting more people know about the work you're doing and why it's important. If I could like
Yeah.
oversimplify it. And there's a bunch of different ways you could do that. You could do that in different channels. You could do it on Slack. You could make videos. You could share at the all company meeting. You could send out memos. You could send out a monthly recap. There's a bunch of ways that you could deliver that. But to me, it comes down to we did some stuff in the context of our goals, right? So the goal for the
Hmm.
company is this. Here's how the work that we did is important to those goals. Here's a little bit about how we approach the work and why that approach is important to us. Here's the thing that we did. And so That would be the 80/20 in terms of increasing visibility from my perspective. What do you think, Elena? Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think the other ones is getting out of your comfort zone. So moving from builder to executive, what I really needed to do is go and have more coffee conversations, go on more hikes and walks. And in remote environments, that's more difficult. But I would drive out to Palo Alto and it's an hour and a half away. And people are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I am connecting with this person as a person. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters, regardless of, the things you've accomplished. And companies go through waves, they grow, they move into a zombie stage. What people remember are those connections that they've made with people, and it factors a lot in that promotion consideration. Like recency bias, as much as we don't want it to be a bias, is a bias. And if they've just had coffee with you, you're going to be a, an actual person versus a line item in their memory. So some things to think about. So we have a bunch more questions. What we're gonna do is get the questions from the survey. I'm going to share this video with Andrew and put it on Substack and see if we can answer some more of those there so that we can continue learning from each other and having this conversation. But thank you all so much for spending these 45 minutes with us. Hopefully some things you can work with as you get back into the job that you're doing. But really great talking to you all. Andrew, any parting words?
No, if you have other questions or you want to connect with us, LinkedIn's a great place. We're both pretty active there in addition to Substack. But yeah, I like answering more questions in the Substack. This is good.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Have a good rest of your Tuesday. Bye.